Welcome. We're going to discuss today the new Canadian Citizenship Act. There has been a lot of changes that happened over the past few months that transformed the old Citizenship Act for Canada to a whole new way of thinking about becoming a citizen in Canada because it actually affects both permanent residents and also the citizens after they receive a Canadian passport. In around June of 2014, some provisions came into the Canadian Citizenship Act. These provisions came into effect finally on June 11th of 2015. So the new Citizenship Act and all its new obligations have come into effect on June 11th of 2015. Any applications for citizenship that came after that are going to be applied for under the new regulations, and all the new laws are going to apply towards them. The main changes that came into the Citizenship Act are the following. The most obvious one, and the one that actually balances things out in terms of the number of years that it takes to obtain a Canadian citizenship, is the following. Before, you used to have around 3 years to live in Canada out of 5 years to be able to apply for a passport. Now, it is 4 out of 6 years, meaning the amount of time that you have to spend in Canada in order to become a citizen has been increased. A lot of people think about that as an extended duration for you to be able to obtain a Canadian passport. But on the contrary, that's actually a very good thing. Because the reason why the change happened in the Canadian Citizenship Act is because the government is trying to eliminate the existing backlog that is pretty much is around a year to a year and a half, and for people that apply for their citizenship and then they have to wait until they obtain their passport. So you used to wait for 3 years. After the 3 years, you apply for your passport. You have to wait around a year and a half, and then you'll be able to receive your passport. So you get your passport in around 4 to 5 years from the day that you become a permanent resident or from the day that you decide to apply for citizenship. Now, what's going to happen is the following. With the backlog being eliminated, the amount of time that it takes to obtain the citizenship, as in the processing time for the approval of the application and obtaining the passport, has been or will be diminishing month by month until around the mid of 2016, where around 80% of the backlog is going to be eliminated. What that means is, when you apply for a passport from the day that you become eligible for one, you don't have to wait for a year or a year and a half to obtain your passport. You might just wait a few weeks or maybe a few months. So even though now it takes 4 out of 6 years to apply for the passport, at the 4th year, let's assume you're eligible to apply, then you immediately apply for the passport, and then you will be able to get your passport just within a few months. Meaning, the total amount of time that it takes to get your passport is almost the same as what it used to be before. So you don't have to wait longer. So this is a very important point I want to bring up to your attention, because a lot of people are thinking that, oh, so now it's going to take me 5 to 6 years to get the passport. That's not true. With the backlog being eliminated, that actually cuts down the processing time by a year and a half, meaning the year extra that you have to spend to be able to get the passport will be equivalent to the year that is going to be removed out of the backlog. And then we will go over these details in a minute. The second part that is also important to highlight now is the English proficiency or the French proficiency. It depends on where you live in Canada, Quebec or outside of Quebec. With the new Citizenship Act, is if you're within the age of 14 to 64, you have to actually now demonstrate your ability to speak the language and also be able to pass a knowledge test. Before, it used to be a different age range, which also we will be able to cover in the comparison section of this program, and then we'll be able to talk about that in depth. So now, so far, we're talking about the duration of time that it takes to get a passport, and also the language proficiency in terms of your eligibility to apply. The next major change that happened is the lost Canadians, as they're being called. Anybody that was born before 1947, which is before the first Citizenship Act, they never became citizens. So now the new Citizenship Act includes them and also their children, which is the first generation, even if that generation was born outside of Canada. So anybody that was born 1947 or before never became a Canadian, even if they live abroad now. Now these are considered lost Canadians. The Citizenship Act includes them. They can become Canadian citizens, and also their first generation children that was who were born outside of Canada. The next major change that also took place is residency obligations. Meaning, before, there was nothing that would force you, or was no clear set criteria for how physical residency is required, or how you can demonstrate your physical residency in Canada for you to be able to apply for a passport. Now, you have to show your intent to reside in Canada. You have to show your intent to pay taxes as you become a citizen, which was not required in the past. Now that, again, it's very different than what it used to be before, and we will compare it shortly. Another very important change that also took place in the Citizenship Act is the protection from fraud, the protection from misrepresentation, as it's called. So in the past, there used to be a very minimal punishment system for any fraud or misrepresentation that takes place. Now, it's a very harsh penalty. We're talking 5 years ban from the country or from obtaining citizenship, in addition to up to 2 years in prison and a $100,000 fine for any fraud that will be part of the citizenship application. And then another interesting part that I would like to highlight as well, part of the changes, is in the past, there was no regulation when it comes to who can represent you when you go apply for citizenship. You know, there's anybody pretty much you can take with you, and you can go and go to your interview or go for the application for citizenship, and you can have a friend or a family member that accompany you. Now, it's actually, there's a regulation of who can accompany you, who can represent you as you go for your citizenship. So the ICCRC, which is the body that was added recently, and all the regulated Canadian immigration consultants, the RCICs, this group was never included in the old Citizenship Act. Now they are. So RCICs, or regulated Canadian consultants, are able to represent you for your citizenship cases, in addition to lawyers and attorneys. And then if in Quebec, then notaries can do it as well. So now these are actually defined in a new Citizenship Act. In the past, no clear definition was there when it comes to the actual representation for your application. So, why these changes? What's going on? Why is the Citizenship Act, after so many years, of being redone? Well, the Canadian government has taken a strong stand towards the immigration aspect of citizenship. Now, the new intention for the government is this: the value of the Canadian passport, or the value of the Canadian citizenship, is suddenly going to be increased. It needs to be maintained at the level that it used to be before. It's not easy to get a Canadian citizenship anymore. It's not easy to maintain your permanent residency, or even if you maintain your permanent residency, the regulations to become a citizen are not as easy as it used to be before. That is a good thing, and also a potentially a restraining way for permanent residents that want to jump in right away to the passport. Now you have to spend more time. There are more regulations as a permanent resident for you to go and obtain your your passport. So the government, they want to improve efficiency. That's why they're promising to cut down the backlog by 80% by 2016, meaning the processing time for the Canadian citizenship application is going to be dropped dramatically from a year to year and a half to probably a few weeks to obtain your passport. Again, like I was mentioning, it reinforces the value of Canadian citizenship by showing your intention to reside in Canada, even if after you become a citizen, by showing your intent to pay taxes and being part of this economy, being part of this culture, which was not a requirement in the past. The cracking down on the fraud aspect of things and the misrepresentation, the harsher penalties, all that will streamline the process of applying for citizenship. It will make it a lot more, actually a lot more, I want to say clear when it comes to the way that you're going to be able to obtain your citizenship, because things are now defined. Before they were not defined. The way your application is going to be processed, the way that it is going to be, the list of requirements, the evidence you have to submit. None of that was there before. Okay? And again, finally, the way of thinking about it is protecting Canada's best interest, protecting the country's best interest in terms of any fraud that might happen, any I want to say illegal activities that took place by a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen, whether it is terrorism or treason or even holding arms against Canada as a permanent resident, as a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen. All these things now are clearly defined in the Citizenship Act, which the government has the right to revoke somebody's citizenship if they are seen as they fit in any of these inadmissibility criteria. So many questions, many different aspects of things when it comes to the old act versus the old act. What we're going to demonstrate now is a comparison system between what each law used to be, or what each focal point used to be in the old Citizenship Act, versus the new laws and the new regulations in the new Citizenship Act. So the first thing is the residency obligations. In the past, you were supposed to collect around 1,095 days, which is 3 years, out of 5 years. The new Citizenship Act now requires you to collect 4 years out of 6 years, which is around 1,460 days. So 3 out of 5 now became 4 out of 6. But not only are you supposed to stay 4 out of 6, there's now a physical presence requirement under the new Citizenship Act. Before, there was no physical presence requirement in the old act. In the new act, there is. Every single year, in the past 4 years, whether it is you sit in the country the full 365 days or partially, you have to maintain a minimum physical presence inside Canada for 6 months, which is 183 days. Meaning, today I'm going to apply for my citizenship. I go and look back 4 years. You look at these 4 years. Have I physically resided in Canada for full 4 years? Have I collected 1,460 days? If the answer is yes, apply for citizenship. If the answer is no, take the 5th year. Have I collected that amount of time? If the answer is yes, you look at these years to see if I have physically remained in Canada for 6 months out of each and every single year. If the answer is no, then you cannot apply for citizenship. I'll give you another example. You stay in Canada for 3 years, 365 days for 3 years. You travel abroad, you go outside of Canada for a whole year. So you did not maintain the 6 months physical presence per year in Canada. You come back after that and you live in Canada for an extra year. So now you have completed 4 years of physical presence in Canada within 5 years. But you have a 1 year gap. and that 1 year gap, you did not maintain 6 months out of that year in the country, you cannot apply for citizenship. So you have to make sure that the minimum amount of presence that you have in each year is 6 months until you collect your total amount of days, which is within 4 years out of the past 6 years. Next is the requirement when it comes to showing your intent to reside, showing your intent to pay taxes. In the old act, there was no requirement to pay taxes or in any intention or any provisions to show your intention to reside in Canada, even after you become a citizen. In the new act, you have to show your intent to reside in Canada. You have to show your intent to pay taxes. There's a major difference between the old act and the new act. Okay. The next one is the old act. When it comes to the language, if you're within the age of 18 to 54, you have to demonstrate your basic knowledge of English and your knowledge of Canada, part of the citizenship requirements. In the new act, you have to demonstrate knowledge of the language if you're within the age of 14 to 64, along with the knowledge of Canada, part of that. So the age range has been increased for you to be able to speak the language versus the old act. The next difference is the citizenship bar when it comes to any criminal provisions. So the old act, if you have any criminal activity that takes place inside Canada, that makes you ineligible to apply for citizenship. The new act, all criminal activities inside Canada and outside Canada will make you ineligible to apply for the citizenship. So they extended it for inside and outside Canada. Now, citizens have to demonstrate a clean record when it comes to their application, both inside and outside of Canada, versus the restrictions only on the internal obligations for that before. The next one up is the penalties for fraud or penalties for misrepresentation. Old act, very simple, very basic. It's around a year, a maximum of years in prison and $1,000 in terms of penalty. The new act, 5 years ban from the country or from applying for citizenship, in addition to a maximum of 2 years in prison, in addition to the $100,000 fine for misrepresentation and fraud. And that covers the applicant and also the authorized representative, whether it's an attorney or an immigration consultant that applies on behalf of that person. The next change, which is I think it's a very, very positive change. In the past, it used to be a 3-step process where it jumps around from multiple entities for you to be able to obtain your citizenship. Versus the new system, it's a 1-step process. In the past, the governor and consul and then the citizenship judge and the citizenship officer would have to work on your application in a 3-step process. That's why the processing time took around a year to a year and a half, because there's around 30 to 40 judges that are working on this. The new act gives the authority to CIC. It gives the authority to the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration to issue the approvals or the denials for citizenship. And there's over 450 different officers working on this. So now you have a lot more volume, a lot more people working on your cases under the new Citizenship Act versus the old one. The next one up is the completion of the application, or how complete your application is. There are no provisions in the old act on what demonstrates a completed application, or even the evidence that you need to submit with that application. The new act, it clearly defines what a complete application is. It clearly defines what the evidence that you're supposed to submit with that application is going to be as it goes to CIC. So the way that the applications are going to be, they're going to be accepted is going to be very clear. They're going to get a list and a checklist to know what you have to do in terms of submitting your application. That process things much quicker than how things used to be and make things a lot more clear as you submit your applications. Okay? And we discussed the taxes, we discussed the intention, the old versus the new. You have to show that part of the new system. So, the next one up in terms of the change, which I think is a very proactive point the government has addressed, is revoking citizenship from I want to say dual citizens or Canadian citizens that hold multiple passports or other nationalities, revoking nationality for anybody that is suspected to be a terrorist, that is suspected to have any treason or hold arms against Canada with another army, with another force outside of Canada. So that now gives the government the authority to pull away and revoke these citizenships from these individuals that are they have bad intentions towards Canada, or they want to harm its citizens or take away from the safety of the country. So that shows the government's objective towards a stronger Canadian citizenship, towards a stronger passport that you can hold as a proud Canadian, whether you're living inside or outside of Canada. So, all in all, the new Citizenship Act is a unique way of the government to say, I want to have a stricter system, I want to have a clearer system, I want to have a more streamlined system, I want to be able to give citizenship much quicker, I want to have an automated system, I want to dedicate more people to work on citizenship applications, but at the same time, I want to have my citizens remain in Canada. I want to show my permanent residents that I need them to stay physically in Canada in order to obtain the citizenship. So, is this a good thing or a bad thing? It honestly depends on the intentions of the individual. If you're planning to make Canada your home, if you want to have your ties with this country, then this is a very healthy approach, and this is a very positive point towards a new Citizenship Act that will bring in more peace inside the country and also will allow Canadian citizens to be very to feel safe inside and outside of Canada as they become Canadian citizens and maintain their citizenship for the years to come.